Recently, at the New York International Auto Show, Lincoln unveiled the Lincoln Corsair for model year 2020. It's a new compact utility vehicle, and at first glance, the car does look pretty good, I'm not gonna lie. The interior and exterior designs seem to be pretty inspired by what Lincoln already has on the market, such as the Navigator and the Aviator. The design language is in line with Lincoln's current design language and whatnot. In real world, this will be a good car to live with.
But how do you know that? Because the car isn't out on the market.
Well, I do know. And the reason for that is because I drove and reviewed its predecessor, the 2017 Lincoln MKC, another compact utility vehicle offering. Now, Lincoln, they've changed the car, of course. The alphabet soup name is basically gone now. It looks like Lincoln's trying to shift away from that, which I think is a good thing. I think a lot of the clients will like it as well because it gets way too confusing. So in this video, I am going to explain why the Corsair will be good and why the Lincoln MKC was a good vehicle to live with.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special report.
The reason I got to drive this car was because of Joe from Shults Lincoln. Now, Shults Lincoln, they are a big dealership a little north of Pittsburgh, and they have a lot of new Lincolns for sale. They'll have basically every model, including the MKT. Special thanks to Joe for allowing me to drive the car. All of his contact information will definitely be down in the description, and obviously Shults Lincoln, their pages, their Snapchat even, I'll include that down below so that you can go add them, and you might as well add me while you're at it. And let's just go into this review. Yeehaw! So, to make it clear, this is going to be a review of a 2017 Lincoln MKC with the 2-liter all-wheel drive. This one, it's a 2-liter 4-cylinder engine. I couldn't find out the exact sticker on it because there wasn't a sticker actually in the car. It was a service loaner. Doing some configuring online, this car did seem to come up between $33,000 to $38,000. But it's actually a pretty good price, and it does help for later on in the video why I say it's a good price to have. So let's start out with the exterior, because obviously that's the first thing that most of you guys will see unless you walk in blindfolded to the car or whatnot. Yes, this is now outdated Lincoln styling because even when the car was in my possession, Lincoln did have newer styling and design language and whatnot. But I will say that design language had turned out really well for Lincoln. We basically saw that design language first with the 2013 Lincoln MKZ, which, can you believe that car is now about 7 years old now in terms of when it came out? That's incredible to think about. And that car has actually aged pretty well. So the MKC, if you're looking for one used, I feel like that one's gonna age pretty well too. I think all the curves work well, the lighting's good, the side profile is really good. The color black, in this car, it works, it's still kind of interesting. I'd probably just prefer a different color, but overall, visually, I would say the car looks pretty good. It's also a case of what time does it look really good? Yes, it looks good during the daytime, but honestly, I think the car looks best at night. Now you know the car is not an ugly duckling, which is a pretty good thing. I think it can actually stand out pretty well and hold its own in terms of design. So, exterior, good marks there. Now let's take a look at the interior. Yeah. You probably don't feel that, but I do. These door sills are very soft. And it sounds like something I shouldn't be making a big deal out of, but remember, this is a CUV category and every little detail matters. Overall, this interior feel, I actually quite like it a pretty decent amount. Before even sitting into the car, it looks pretty inviting. There's almost like stitched leather on the doors themselves. The instrument cluster doesn't look very cluttered when everything is off, and the seats look relatively nice. The seats in particular, once you sit in them, it actually ends up being better than they look. The bolstering almost seems to hold me just right for a non-sports car, and it actually ends up being very supportive too. The seat adjustments are relatively what you want. You can move it forwards, you can move it backwards, you can adjust the backrest, you can adjust lumbar, you can adjust the headrest, so it's relatively easy to get pretty comfortable in this car. Now, visibility, I would say it's actually pretty good. Even though I have 2 cameras blocking my view, I can see what's to the sides of me very well. The side windows do help a little bit. There's enough visibility towards the back, even with the seats up. Well, the seats are always up anyway. And the mirrors even have like a convex corner to them, so that actually helps with some blind spot visibility. This one does not have blind spot assist, but I believe that is an option on this car. Forward visibility specifically, the A-pillar is not too thick that it ends up blocking everything, and even though the front of the car is a little bit raked, I still feel like there's enough for me to see high enough in front of me, and then even headroom is pretty good. The steering wheel is actually pretty good. It almost may seem like there are a good bit of buttons, but everything is very functional and it really ends up not being overwhelming at all. Attached to the steering wheel are two paddle shifters, one to shift up, the other to shift down. They feel relatively okay. It's not super premium, definitely not aluminum in any way, but it still feels pretty good. Usually buyers of such a vehicle like this aren't looking for the highest in sport modes anyway, so to be able to have that option to still be able to change your own gears, especially depending on if weather isn't very good and stuff like that, it's a nice option to have. The instrument cluster is actually a nice mix of digital and analog. The needles are pretty much digital, but the surroundings are actually analog. The center cluster in particular is one that's very worth noting, because this is a point where Lincoln had a bit of dark times a few years ago. With the whole Sync 3 system that all the newer Lincolns are getting, what a change that is. It's almost as if they got the best of both worlds. Like, I know they wanted to have a more sleek design, everything flowing a bit better. On the previous systems, it wasn't the best. It took a good bit of getting used to, and it didn't always work very well. Well, in this one, a lot of the physical buttons are back, so you also don't need to hunt through menus to find a lot of stuff, so that's really nice. This car does come equipped with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, even if you do not have navigation. So this car doesn't have nav, but that's relatively okay, because right now I have Waze up on my phone and I could use that for whatever navigation I wanted. Does this car look like it has an appealing interior? I think it does. Heated front seats do come standard, and luckily there isn't much of a feel that reminds you that you didn't spend more than $40,000. So you can actually be pretty content with the interior with relatively few options in it. A question a lot of people might have might be related to the push button gear selector. Now, does it work in the real world? Yes, it does. Is it something that ends up being very confusing in the real world? Not really. Me personally, I never mixed it up or anything. I feel like for a lot of drivers who might worry about mixing it up or something, once you live with the car, you're never going to mess it up, so I really don't think that's a concern. I don't know what maybe Consumer Reports said about it, but I think it's actually a design that works. I've mentioned the exterior, how I like it. I've mentioned the interior, how I like it. Now, how do I like the driving? Now for the driving impressions. Now this is another one that, as a new CUV driver in a way, I don't know if I have that much room to talk about this one because I own a station wagon. Those of you who know how station wagon owners are like, know that that car is basically the antichrist to compact utility vehicles. Obviously, I'm going to prefer my station wagons, the ones that I've driven and the one that I own actually. So my view of the driving dynamics of the MKC will get a little bit more biased. So this 2017 Lincoln MKC specifically has a 2-liter motor, and it's good for whatever stats are on the screen here. Now this car had the 2-liter 4-cylinder all-wheel drive. Now, how did that motor perform? Relatively okay. I think that the optional 2.3 would be better. I haven't driven that one, but I feel like that one would probably be better. However, if you don't really feel like spending the extra money on it, or you don't care, or don't really whatever, there is a workaround for that, and that is the paddle shifters. Now, for people who might be like, oh, I don't want to deal with paddles or anything, chances are if you get this car in your day-to-day driving, you'll be fine. You'll be perfectly fine, even merging onto the highways in a lot of cases. But it's just one of those things where if you really feel like you want a little bit more, you can make a little bit more use out of the engine thanks to the paddle shift. Now, for handling, personally, I actually find it to be relatively okay. It's not going to be the same as my family's Lincoln MKT, but it does seem to control its role a bit better than I expected in the corners, even though this car does have a higher rollover risk sticker. But let's try and be a little bit more objective here. As a highway floater, this thing will work pretty well. On straight lines, floats relatively well, And even on mild highway curves, I think it'll work pretty well. Now currently I am on the highway and the car actually does seem to float relatively well. And that's due to the package of wheels that it has on, as well as the suspension on the car. I think that package actually works well for floating along at pretty much speed limit. I'm pretty much doing speed limit right now, and the car actually seems to be floating along pretty nicely. So that's a pretty good mark right there. Recently I was actually in Miami, Florida, and a lot of straight roads around there, Fort Lauderdale, the highways, even like the more local roads being pretty straight. I think the MKC will be pretty at home there, although you will probably want the cooled seats if you're down there. I think the car will be pretty at home and you won't really have much of an issue with some of the dynamics. Obviously, the car is not going to be a back road curver like even the MKT surprisingly is. It's going to be a little bit more different. It just wasn't designed to be that super sharp compact utility vehicle. Now, if you want one of those, you're gonna have to spend a good bit more money and probably make some other sacrifices. And I'm referring more to some of the German competition because theirs do cost a good bit more, but they will nickel and dime you for a lot of the options. The BMW X1, you had to pay extra for even a backup camera and a lot of other features that if you said to a Lincoln person, yeah, these features cost extra on a BMW, they'll be like, what? So overall, how did I feel about the 2017 Lincoln MKC? Well, it looks really good, the interior feels pretty good, and overall the car doesn't remind you that you spent a good bit less than $40,000 on it, which is a really good asset, and I think that's a really good value proposition for the car. Would I buy it? Of course I wouldn't because, well, station wagon, I love mine too much, and I'm just not exactly the kind of buyer that Lincoln would expect me to buy, especially when I would prefer how the MKZ is like, which I don't know, however they're gonna rename that one for 2020 or whatever. It's overall a pretty good car for many people. I think Americans in general would really like it. So fair play to Lincoln for creating it. I think they should have some pretty good success with the Corsair when that comes out in 2020 because the updated design, I think the interior also looks better. Even though the old one, I liked it, the new one should be even better. Exterior should be better. I hear that the new Corsair is also roomier than the MKC was. So I think it'll actually be a pretty good car. We'll see whenever I can get my hands on it. We'll see if Lincoln lets me or if Shults Lincoln will let me. So we'll see. But anyway, thank you guys for watching this video. And a special thanks once again goes out to Joe at Shults Lincoln. His information and Shults Lincoln's information will be all in the description. So please give them a buzz if you're interested in a new or pre-owned Lincoln. I will say that a lot of those guys love the certified pre-owned warranties because they're actually pretty good. Thank you for watching this video. Please be sure to follow the page, give some likes, and I will catch you at another video.